determined it would be best to leave you all as attendees because we did not notice this as sort of a special council meeting or indicate that there might be a quorum of council members here tonight. So it may not be an issue if we see there's only 2 or 3, but just in an abundance of caution, we're going to leave you as attendees at this point. All right, at 6:30 sharp, I want to, for those that don't know, I'm Matt Larson. I have the privilege of being the mayor of Snoqualmie. I want to welcome those of you that have taken the time to come here tonight. Just to go over a little more about what the purpose of tonight is this is not intended as a platform to be promoting or opposing any the levy that's going on, Proposition 1 that's going on the ballot this November. It's purely for informational purposes. I likened it to a few years ago. I was doing a State of the City presentation of the Chamber of Commerce, and one of the things I did was I had voting tabs or tablets distributed throughout the table so the audience could vote. I showed them a picture of a street and asked them to rate the quality of that street, whether they thought it was in good condition or bad condition. And the votes came back that it was in quite good condition or good overall, not excellent, but good. And then we subsequently showed more photos kind of zooming into the street, showing a AA battery about to fall into a crack, and explain that, you know, if we don't go out and grind and overlay a street like in a 12-year cycle, it could turn from, in this case, we were looking at a section of fairway between Ridge Street and the Parkway. And if we didn't redo that section, you know, within a 2 or 3 year time frame, we could risk having more damage done to the base layer underneath. And if that base layer started to fail, it would cost as much as 4 or 5 times more to fix it than if we did ongoing preventative maintenance. And the intention at that time wasn't promoting or talking about a levy. It was just to inform the public of some of the challenges we have, or the perception, the pushback we might have is, hey, why are you grinding and overlaying that street when there's some streets downtown that are in worse shape? Or some streets downtown, the base layer and the surface layer had already failed, and so the urgency wasn't there. And so those are some of the choices were left. Well, after I did that, we asked the audience to vote again, and as you can imagine, the scores came down quite a bit when we asked to rate that street. So if there's one thing I've experienced in being a public servant these many years, is that the public wants 2 things from their elected officials. One is to hear their concerns and do what the majority of the community wants. That you know, we're their representatives. You know, we don't call the shots. We answer to the voters. But secondly, the public also is hungry for good information so that they can be informed taxpayers, informed voters on matters. And so that is precisely the intent of tonight. Is just like the presentation I described I did a few years ago, is to simply provide you with the factual information and background as to why the decision was made by the council, with our recommendation, of course, with my administration's recommendation to put this proposition on the ballot. And so with that, without taking much more time, the format's pretty simple tonight, and I suspect it might be a fairly small crowd, so hopefully we can keep this pretty informal and intimate when we get to it. But I'm gonna turn it over to Drew Boutet, who's one of our financial analysts in the city. He always does a great job going through these very thoroughly and does many presentations to the city council. Drew is going to go through all the background information on that in over about 20 minutes. So ask for your patience, and please take copious notes on any of the slides. Note the slide number if you have questions, because after the presentation, roughly about 5 minutes to 7, we'll open it up for some questions and answers. You'll note in the bottom of the center of your screen, there should be an icon that says raise hand. When the time comes, we'll ask that you just click on that. And anyway, when we come to the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit more about that. At this point, I want to quickly get it over to Drew to cue up the presentation so we can move on. So Drew, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor. And thank you to everyone for coming to tonight's town hall meeting. My name, as the Mayor said, is Drew Boutet, and I am the Senior Financial Analyst here at the City of Snoqualmie. The intent of tonight's presentation is to provide you with some of the facts and the city's estimates regarding Proposition number 1. If you're interested, In reviewing the slideshow and other materials following the presentation, we will have links and a QR code at the end that will take you to our Proposition Number 1 website. Now, just to provide you with some of the basics of the ballot measure, Proposition Number 1 asks the voters to consider a 0.2% sales and use tax that would specifically apply to retail sales within the city of Snoqualmie and not other places such as Issaquah, North End, or Bellevue, which would start on April 1st, 2022, and which would expire at the end of 10 years, or if the tax is bonded against, the time necessary to repay the bond. Now, there is a condition attached to Proposition Number 1 that you may read within the explanatory statement of the voter's pamphlet. Council has adopted an ordinance 1251, that would repeal the existing annual $40 vehicle license fee, otherwise known as the car tab, on March 31st, 2022. But only if Proposition Number 1 is approved by a majority of voters. This, as it turns out, also implies that if Proposition Number 1 is not approved by a majority of voters, then the existing annual $40 vehicle license fee will remain in effect. The question that may come up is, what constitutes the annual $40 vehicle license fee? The answer is that $20 of the vehicle license fee is currently permanent. In other words, it does not have an expiration date. The $20 permanent vehicle license fee is intended to fund transportation capital programs included in the city's capital improvement plan, otherwise known as the CIP. Just to explain a little bit, the CIP is a planning and financial management tool that helps the city identify and prioritize capital investments for funding over a 6-year period. Now, the other $20 of the $40 vehicle license fee is temporary and is currently scheduled to expire on September the 30th, 2022. This portion of the vehicle license fee is intended to fund the city's share of the temporary I-90 on-ramp improvements. The takeaway, however, is that both the $20 permanent fee and the $20 temporary fee will be repealed if Proposition Number 1 is approved. Another question you may have is, what would the 0.2% sales and use tax fund? Well, the goal of these funds would be to help pay for transportation improvements included in the city's adopted 6-year transportation improvement plan, otherwise known as the STIP. The STIP is a plan that the city adopts annually and then submits to regional and state agencies in order to become eligible for state and federal grants. In addition, these funds would be used to help pay for transportation improvements included in the non-utility CIP, for which there is often tremendous overlap with the STIP. More specifically, the city plans to allocate these funds to 3 of the city's CIP capital programs: the Street Resurfacing Program, the Snoqualmie Parkway Rehabilitation Program, and the Sidewalk Replacement Program. These programs are designed to maintain current transportation levels of service in Snoqualmie. In order to do so, the city is asking voters to pair a reoccurring source of expenditures, such as the repaving of streets and the replacement of sidewalks, with a sustainable and reliable source of revenue that would partially come from residents and partially come from non-residents. Just to address the program cited, the goal of the Street Resurfacing Program is to rehabilitate city streets and alleys in a comprehensive and systematic way before they require extensive and expensive reconstruction. The city intends to resurface streets based on their pavement condition score, using the most appropriate treatment strategy, such as crack seal, microsurfacing, or asphalt overlay that matches the condition of the roadway. The goal of the Snoqualmie Parkway Rehabilitation Program is to protect one of the city's most vital assets, the Parkway. The intent is to address high priority maintenance needs, including but not limited to the resurfacing of the roadway, replacement of guardrail, streetlights, and traffic signal systems. The goal of the sidewalk replacement program is simple: it's to replace sidewalks. City intends to replace sidewalks based on a score that prioritizes safety and access to facilities such as parks and schools. In addition to these capital programs, The city has been contemplating how to fund other potential projects in the future, such as the SR 202 and Meadowbrook Way Channelization Project, which would construct turning lanes at the intersection of SR 202 and Meadowbrook Way to help reduce the potential for collisions. The Kimball Creek Box Culverts Project, which would allow Kimball Creek to flow without constriction underneath Meadowbrook Way, preventing some localized flooding and providing for fish passage, as well as 3 bridges that are quickly approaching 100 years of age, including the SR 202 bridge over the Snoqualmie River, the SR 202 bridge over Kimball Creek, and the Meadowbrook Bridge over the Snoqualmie River. All 3 will need some preventative maintenance in the future to make sure they can last even longer. Another important question is how much would the 0.2% sales and use tax generate? The city estimates that the tax would generate approximately $550,000 in annual ongoing revenue, which would be paid for by residents and non-residents alike. Now, before I move on, I would like to talk briefly about what the city means by non-residents. You may see the city emphasize in materials the tourists that visit each year to see hallowed Snoqualmie Falls, the Northwest Railway Museum, or the elk herd at Meadowbrook Farm. But the term non-resident also refers to others, such as construction contractors, as well as businesses employees in the corporate, manufacturing, and wholesale business community currently located in the business park on Snoqualmie Ridge. With that said, the current $40 vehicle license fee generates approximately $406,000 annually and is paid for overwhelmingly by its city residents. If the voters approve Proposition Number 1, then the city expects to generate roughly $144,000 more in annual ongoing revenue for transportation improvements. Last year, and to give you a sense of Snoqualmie's sales tax base, slightly more than $300 million in taxable goods and services were sold to residents and non-residents within the city of Snoqualmie in 2020, as indicated by the highlighted box in yellow. Now, just to describe the current sales tax rate in the city of Snoqualmie currently has an 8.7% sales tax rate, which is comprised of a 6.5% state sales tax and a 2.2% local sales tax. The local sales tax is presently split, with the majority going to King County, which includes Metro Transit, and the remaining portion going to the city of Snoqualmie. If you were to purchase $100 of taxable goods and services within the city, you would be taxed $8.70 in total. However, if the voters approve Proposition Number 1, then the city's total sales tax rate would increase from 8.7 to 8.9%. This would mean that instead of an $8.70 tax on the $100 purchase of taxable goods and services, you would be taxed $8.90 in total, which is a difference of 20 cents. In order to give you a sense of how the city of Snoqualmie's current total sales tax rate compares against other cities, we have prepared this table. As you can see, in comparison with other East Side and Snoqualmie Valley communities, the city of Snoqualmie is currently tied with Carnation at 8.7%. If voters approve Proposition Number 1, increasing the sales tax rate from 8.7 to 8.9%, then the city of Snoqualmie would move up at least one spot into a tie with Duval. Now, it's important to understand that there are several goods that are exempt from the sales tax. The most common ones applicable to Snoqualmie residents include many items sold at the grocery store, as well as prescription drugs. Things like alcohol and items prepared by the grocery store, however, are not exempt. In addition, there are a multitude of other exemptions that, while less applicable, may nonetheless impact you in the future. As a result, we have included a link to the Department of Revenue list of exemptions on this slide. And just to kind of give you a little preview, that the entire list is found here, and you can certainly scroll through it, but it is a pretty healthy list, as you can see. Furthermore, there are other major expenses that you may pay that would not be, or would only partially be subject to the sales tax. For example, your water and electric bill would not be subject to this sales tax. In addition, a portion of your wireless phone bill and the amount you pay for internet access will not be subject to the sales tax. Lastly, many services are not subject to this sales tax. Finally, since 2008, the state of Washington has used something called a destination-based sales tax system. Under this system, the tax rate that is owed depends on the location of the sale or delivery, not the location of the business or the shipping warehouse. For example, if you buy a $300 piece of furniture online that is shipped from a warehouse in Issaquah and have it delivered to you in Snoqualmie, you will pay Snoqualmie's local sales tax rate. But if you take possession of the $300 piece of furniture at a retail location in Issaquah, you will pay Issaquah's local sales tax rate. Because Issaquah's local sales tax rate is higher, as shown in the previous slide, the $300 piece of furniture purchased in Issaquah will cost you $3.60 more in sales tax than if you had purchased the furniture online and had it delivered to Snoqualmie, even if the voters approved proposition number 1. One thing that you will see in the explanatory statement of your voters pamphlet is a comparison between the estimated annual per capita cost of the 0.2% sales and use tax and the $40 vehicle license fee. In order to develop these estimates, city staff took the amount of vehicle license fees and sales tax revenues generated by residents annually and then divided them by Snoqualmie's 2020 population. As a result, city staff estimates that the annual per capita impact of the $40 vehicle license fee is $29.66, and the annual per capita impact of the 0.2% sales and use tax is $20.73. Consequently, city staff estimates that the 0.2% sales and use tax will cost the residents of Snoqualmie on a per capita basis approximately $8.93 less annually than the $40 vehicle license fee. However, the 0.2% sales and use tax will not only generate an amount from residents, but also from non-residents, which, as you recall, represents not only tourists, but also others, such as the corporate, manufacturing, and wholesale employees and businesses located in the business park. Indeed, staff estimates that these non-residents will generate approximately $21.58 per capita in sales tax revenue, and this contrasts sharply with the $0 per capita non-residents are estimated to generate under the $40 vehicle license fee. Thus, for the estimated $8.93 less per capita residents might pay under the 0.2% sales and use tax, non-residents are anticipated to make up the difference and then some, contributing an estimated $21.58 per capita towards transportation improvements. Finally, to give you a sense of what other cities do, 54 cities, including Snoqualmie, currently impose a vehicle license fee only for transportation improvements. 44 cities have approved a sales and use tax only for transportation improvements. And lastly, 6 cities have some combination of a vehicle license fee and sales and use tax for transportation improvements. Those 44 cities that have approved a sales and use tax only for transportation improvements include 2 neighbors, Duval and North Bend. And in fact, North Bend this year is asking its residents to renew their 0.2% sales and use tax. So don't be surprised if you see that in your voters pamphlet as well. As promised at the beginning of the presentation, here is the link and QR code that will take you to the city's Proposition Number 1 website, where you can access this presentation as well as other related materials. And so with that said, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to present to you. Now, I would like to turn it back over to the mayor for the question and answer session. Thank you. Mayor?
Sorry, I did the common, you're muted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, as you're probably read half of this by the time I was talking to myself. Yeah, this is a nice intimate crowd. So again, I don't think I need to read all these. You can see them right in front of you. We'll leave them up for the moment. But again, just an opportunity to ask for the public to ask any questions and clarifying. We do have members there are members of a con committee, a formal con committee and pro committee. I don't know if there's any present. If you'd like to, you could certainly identify yourself as being a member of the pro or con committee. But again, I would ask anybody who, whether you're on a pro or con committee or whether you're just a citizen out there with questions, just please refrain from any advocating for or against the proposition one, if you could. So with that, let's go ahead and open it. Adam Babcock, I see your hand up. We'll turn your microphone on once that I see that on. And we're not doing limitations, or Adam, if you could just wait for a second, we're not doing limitations on, I'm not saying 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And again, this is a fairly small group, but just be mindful that there's others here that would like an opportunity to speak. And so, so just be respectful of the other folks that are taking time out of their evening to be here to give them. So Adam, with that, go ahead.
Hi, yes, everybody hear me?
Yeah, and Adam, I know you're a Snoqualmie resident, but I would just ask of others to at least identify name and address. The address is less about where you live than just confirming that, letting people know whether you're a Snoqualmie resident who would actually be paying this tax, or if you're not a Snoqualmie resident.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Snoqualmie resident on Jacobia Street. That's where I live. And I'm not very good with math, so I'm trying to figure out the $40 total tab fee currently is going to reduce, regardless of whether Prop 1 passes or not. It'll be dropping to $20 no later than September of 2022, as I understand it. And in my mind, it seems like instead of since half of the fee is going away, the 0.02% should also be half of that fee, because it's trying to make up for the $40 potentially going away, right? But in reality, the long term, it's only $20 going away. So I was thinking it'd be more reasonable to have a 0.01% sales and use tax rather than the 0.02%, because we're not replacing a full 40, we're replacing only 20. So can someone explain to me why we're increasing basically by double the fee with a tax, if that math makes sense to you guys?
Right. Well, if I understand it correctly, Adam, and Drew, jump in if I get anything off here. No, in fact, the entire $40 would be going away, not just half of it. The entire $40, the temporary one along with the permanent one, would be rescinded in its entirety if the voters were to approve Proposition 1.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is, let's say that it's voted, it's not approved. In September of 2022, the fee, $20 of the fee will drop away by design, right?
That's correct.
So I'm not understanding the math on why we're aiming for, say, 425,000 in revenue when it has always been 225,000 or whatever. It's like I'm just not understanding why it's 0.02% instead of 0.01%, because half of that car tab fee is going away no matter what happens with Prop 1. So I'm just trying to make sense of where's that extra revenue going to go, I guess, is really my question.
Drew, I could keep if you
so there's only one place that it can go. It has to go towards transportation improvements. In essence, that's the only thing that's eligible to use this money for. So we would continue to use it per what we said today, basically, for those 3 capital programs that we cited. I think I understand where you're coming from for the most part. Part of the difficulty that we have is kind of embedded in your question is a belief or assumption that as soon as the temporary $20 portion of the vehicle license fee expires in September of next year, the council would then not reimpose the $20 as they have the authority to do so for some other project or even permanently. And so what you're asking with your question is for city staff to kind of predict the actions of council in the future following the expiration of the $20 vehicle license fee on September 30th, 2022. And because we're not really comfortable with that, we chose to provide an estimate that is based on what is current and true today. And that is a $40 vehicle license fee. So in the materials that you see, that is kind of what we're presenting, because that is the current state of where we're in right now.
Yeah, I think, Adam, if I could add that what Drew's trying to describe is we see the need, the capital need as great enough to justify that higher number. In fact, the staff was advocating for putting the 0.2% transportation monies out there for a vote while keeping the tab fee. The council said, no, we don't think we're in a, coming out of COVID, we're not in an environment where the public's going to be very receptive to that. But part of why the staff was advocating is because we just see a lot of capital challenges. And just to try to quickly give you a couple snapshots of why that is when Snoqualmie Ridge was basically put underway, there was an extensive fiscal analysis done. It was a cost benefit analysis. What are all the projected potential revenues from the master plan community of Snoqualmie Ridge, and what are all the projected costs and expenses? And on a whole, is it coming out ahead or behind? And obviously, if it was going to be a big loss, it wouldn't be very compelling to do it. And the city, by state law, we can assess a developer to mitigate for all of the impacts that they have to the existing community. What we cannot do by law is assess to the developer any mitigations for existing deficits in the community. And what I mean by that is that Snoqualmie, it was a small historic town of about 1,600 population up until the time that Snoqualmie Ridge was being born. And in fact, Snoqualmie Ridge was conceived as a way to sort of pull the historic town out of a virtual state of bankruptcy. The town had been going broke. It had lost the mill site as the main economic engine. Because of levees that were built in the 70s, 60s, 70s out north at Bend, flooding became more frequent, which constantly kind of knocked the town off its feet. And when the interstate freeway was built in 1972, like small town America, it was all over, it kind of sucked the revenue out of the small town Main Street. So Snoqualmie went into a death spiral for several decades. And as you heard me describe the importance on maintaining infrastructure earlier, if you don't properly maintain it, that deferred maintenance can make your costs balloon considerably. The best metaphor I can think for like a homeowner is imagine having a leak in the roof of your house, and it would be $300 to fix, but you can't afford that. So you let that problem go and just put a bucket underneath it for a while. Well, that $300 problem is going to turn into a $3,000 or $30,000 problem, depending on how long you leave it there, because it's going to start rotting the drywall and the timber and all that. So streets and infrastructure is the same way. If you don't properly maintain it, it goes from $100,000 to $500,000 pretty quickly if it starts to have greater degradation. And in downtown, it wasn't just degradation on the streets that began to failure, and not just the surface, but the base layers, but also the infrastructure under the ground, the storm water and sewer facilities or pipes, many that were like concrete, were on the verge of failure. So as we go 20 years into now Snoqualmie Ridge, whereas all of the costs of Snoqualmie Ridge were properly mitigated for, we've had to siphon off considerable resources to attend to that decades of neglect downtown. And that's what been pressures we've seen on our utility rates. And for downtown, though, we have the advantage of when we dig up a street to replace water, storm, and sewer facilities, the utilities can pay for the resurfacing and rebuild of that street. On the ridge, we're facing a very different dynamic. All of the ridge infrastructure is now coming of age at the same time. Everything was built about 20 years ago, or started 20 years ago. So everything's come up to those first 12 to 18-year maintenance cycles. So it's kind of like a sleeping giant waking up, needing a lot of attention all at once. And the odd thing with streets is streets sits in the general fund and competes for dollars with fire and police and parks and all the other general city services. And again, you'd say, well, why is that a big deal? Because the city's been getting lots of new revenue from growth over the years. Well, the other fundamental change that happened back in 2001 was one of the IMAN initiatives, I-747, that restricted property tax increases to 1%. And so since 2001, cities across the state have not been able to keep up with inflation that runs in the neighborhood of 3 to 3.5%. What that 3 to 3.5% inflation doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're looking at a general fund budget of our size, that means we fall behind about $250,000 every year. And so we have to come up with about $250,000 of new revenue every year just to maintain status quo and keep the city services where they are. And when we have all those infrastructure issues that have been like the downtown stuff, sort of pulling away resources for that while trying to tend to infrastructure here, it just puts great stress on the system unless we're finding new ways to bring in revenue, whether it's economic development or continuing, I'm sorry, my grandfather clock's going to go off here, or continuing to cut costs, which you can't do for 20 years since 2001. Imagine if we were cutting costs at 3% per year, well, after 10 years, that's a 30% cut in your operational budget. That just isn't sustainable.
And yeah, I think those are all really insightful comments. If I could just butt in real quick, then I'll let someone else chime in. I understand that, the streets things need to be repaired, but again, that the half of the $20 fee that this is replacing, it was meant for the on ramp, right? The temporary fix on the on ramp, which is a completed project. So
Right.
It seems like with that completed project, that $20 fee should just go away forever, whether it goes away in September of 2022 or somewhere else. But instead, if Prop 1 passes, I'm not understanding why we would basically say, okay, yeah, we want to fund another temporary on ramp every single year forever by this new tax. That's, in my mind, it seems like that's what we're doing. That's why I'm not understanding the 0.02% instead of the 0.01%, since the fee is going away, if that makes sense, because it's a completed project.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
therefore a completed fee.
So let me try and come at it a little bit different, then we'll give Tanya a chance to jump in, and I'm sure there'll be more time if you want to come back to that. We've identified that we clearly need more revenue. We need more revenue to again, there's been a lot of things we've been tending to with the growing pains of keeping up with Snoqualmie Ridge all these years. As we're coming to the full build out, and we're not seeing all this new revenue coming in from the growth and development of Snoqualmie Ridge anymore. And it really goes back to the structural issue I talked about that keeping up with inflation, of that $250,000 loss every year. And there are two things that fundamentally kind of knocked us off the road back in the fourth quarter of 2019. And one was the purchase of the Salish Lodge by the Snoqualmie tribe. That expansion of the lodge was one of those strategic pieces that said, hey, rather than going out for taxing or asking the public for tax increases, if we have this economic development that's good for tourism, we'll bring a lot more money in town. Here's a way we can bring more money that'll buy 3, 4, 5 years of new revenue up to $1 million a year of ongoing sustainable revenue that will support that increase in cost of operations to maintain the service levels for our citizens. The second thing was then immediately in the first quarter, 2020, one quarter later, we went right into COVID. And whether it's the hospitality industry or retail across the board, we got pretty much a big gut punch again too, where we've lost upwards of $1 million and have a lot of ground to cover to make up for that. At the same time, we're experiencing those ongoing cost increases, and we lost that 3 or 4 years of revenue infill that the Salish Lodge expansion would have provided. So that only leaves us with trying to look for some sort of a new revenue through tax increases or fees or whatnot. And so this is one mechanism that we can take pressure off of other areas of the general fund to free up monies to again take care of some of the capital liabilities that we have. We've got about $30 million of capital needs with about $15 million of capital reserves or monies to throw at that. And so again, this even if we captured all of this, and this is again was going back to even the staff saying, hey, it'd be great if we could hang on to at least the $20 permanent card tab fee in addition to a voted 0.2%. The council thought that would be a hard sell with the public. We decided, well, that would be desirable. We're backing up on that and saying, no, let's not ask for too much at this time, particularly that, a lot of folks are still in rough shape coming out of COVID. So again, that might not satisfy you, and I'll try and have time to come back with.
No, that is good. Thanks. I appreciate it. That's good. I do want to point out just how you said we don't want to ask for that much at this time. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next questioner. Thanks.
Oh, fair enough. I will be forthright and say that the council in this retreats and in a very public way has also already been talking about the fact that we will be having to probably come out to the public by 2023, if not sooner, looking at a levy lid lift. If councils could have done what they did in the past, and that was raise the property taxes by 3% per year to keep up with that inflation, these would not be challenges or issues. I think it's a very important dialogue to have with the community that says, hey, if you don't want to see your service levels drop, then we only have two other options. If we're not going to cut costs, and that is we go to economic development. A lot of you don't like growth, but if you don't like growth, then we only have one other tool, and that's raising taxes and fees. So what do you want? Taxes and fees? I would love to have that conversation with the community and put that on community surveys and get that answer. But we can't do magic. I can't fix roads without money. I can't pay police officers and parks workers and all that without money. So yeah, no, there's no, I'm not shying away from the fact that we're going to need to go out and have that conversation and probably ask the community for monies beyond what's being asked this November. Tanya, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
So Tanya Lavoie, I'm a Snoqualmie resident over on Cochrane Street. So I think this is a question for Drew mainly. And I guess slide 17 would probably be the best slide. I was hoping you could discuss a little bit more what model you're using to determine the resident versus non-resident split. And you kind of hinted at it a little bit with sources of the sales and use tax. But I've seen a little bit of questions and queries online about that. So if you could go into a little bit more detail on how you model that.
Sure, yes. So just to kind of provide at least a definition here, residence implies, it's very simple. It just implies if you live here, basically, if you're actually going out and purchasing products within the community. But there are some other activities that are also happening within this community, such as business to business transactions that aren't necessarily resident related, for example. So you could take a corporation such as Z-Tech or Technical Glass or Space Labs, for example, the business park, and they're actually purchasing products continuously. And a lot of that, what they're purchasing is delivered to them specifically in Snoqualmie. And as a result, they have to pay a sales tax here. Not only does non-resident capture that aspect, but it also captures the aspects of our tourists that come here through this community on an annual basis, for example. And we do have a lot of tourists that flow through this community. In addition to that, there are potentially some construction contractors that might be building something in Snoqualmie. It would also be captured within this non-resident category as well. Now, in terms of actually getting to an estimate, what we do is we start with our total sales tax base, and then we try to figure out on a company by company basis, and really per each category, is this company and the sales tax that they pay, is it primarily provided by residents or is it primarily driven by non-residents? And so we try to separate and kind of aggregate that out, or separate that out as best as possible to come up with some estimates regarding how much each resident per capita would spend, as well as how much each non-resident per capita would spend as well. Within this calculation, we're also dividing by the 2020 population estimate of roughly 13,680. And that's kind of how we get to these numbers that you see here. So I hope that's a decent explanation on that.
All right, Drew, I think the formula you used on at least the $40 fee for a per capita was just taking the total revenue collected per year divided by the number of residents in the city. So some of that's pretty simple. The sales tax one is far more complex to try and nail down, and certainly has some, arguably some different ways you could interpret that, Tanya. So I think it's a great question. It's one we actually struggled with the council, right? Because they were asking similar questions and trying to arrive at a methodology that was agreeable. Tanya, was that a satisfactory answer? Did you have more questions or follow up on that?
No, I think that pretty much answered it. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any other hands or questions from the public? Richard, go ahead, or Mr. Shield.
Hi, this is Richard Shield. I'm a Snoqualmie resident, live on Crestview Loop. Also, the mayor had asked me to identify myself as the husband of council member Peggy Shepard. Personally, I don't think that matters, but in case it makes a difference to anybody. I'm also a member of the CON committee, but I'll make sure that I ask only factual questions. I'm not advocating one way or another. I actually have kind of a couple of questions that intertwine upon one another. So let me know if there are other people waiting and I can try to abbreviate, but if no one else is waiting, I'll ask the couple of questions.
You're fine. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. So first of all, between what Mr. Boutte and Mr. Larson had mentioned, that there's no way to forecast what in the future the city council might do as far as car tabs if Prop 1 is turned down by the voters. But I think similarly, even if Prop 1 is passed, could you please clarify, I believe that the city council could still pass car tabs in the future in addition to the sales tax. Could you clarify if that's correct or not?
That's absolutely correct. Yes, they could. And that was frankly one of the parts of our vigorous conversations was kind of are you sure you want to do this? Once you represent to the community that as a condition of the passage of Prop 1, you're going to rescind the car tab fees, it's pretty hard to back up on that. And it's been my experience that local elected officials are pretty reticent to back up on a promise like that. So while it's absolutely true that they could a month after the vote is approved, come back and say, hey, we're going to reinstitute the car tab fees. Highly, highly unlikely, given again that they're elected officials accountable to the people who elect them. If they want to get elected again, that's not typically what I've seen. But technically speaking, that's absolutely correct.
Thank you. And then kind of another related one, which again gets into what the car tabs might be in the future, which again, acknowledging the fact that that is up to the city council at any given time. It doesn't go to the voters for a decision on that. So the charts, such as the per capita one on slide 16, for example, that's all based on if a $40 car tab fee continued in the future. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to also post along with the city's other materials that are providing factual information, what it looks like, again, based on what the city council has set so far for the plan for the car tabs, if Proposition 1 doesn't pass, what it would look like for the 9.5 years or more when the car tab fees would be $20 rather than $40. Because I believe that would make this chart, instead of being $29.66, it would be like, well, just a shade under $15 for $20 license fees for future years. And I was wondering if those sorts of materials could be made available to the public as well.
Right. So this is what you're referring to right here, correct?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what was first presented to the council, and actually the conclusion was that I think the difference between the 1483 and 2158 is about $5.90. So on a per capita basis, if after that temporary fee retires in September of 22, if I had that date right, then you're correct. It would actually result in a higher per capita fee of about $5.90, not a lower one. So again, this is where it gets difficult to predict the future. I think the council was more inclined to say no. It's I think adequate to present the $40 one. That's what we currently are, and knowing where the needs are right now. One of the questions of what would be the consequences if Prop 1 wasn't approved. It could be a lowering the levels of service, just letting some roads go. But here's if I was to predict it, I would say that this would be one of the few places where the council would turn. And even if there was a several month or a year or two gap, it's very likely the council would go back and increase that back to a $40 fee. And the reason why I say that is this: it has entirely to do with fiscal responsibility. What the council understands is that there are certain roads and infrastructure, particularly the Parkway, for example. Right now, we're facing a $6 million cost to just to grind and overlay the entire Parkway, and it's overdue. It's about 3 years overdue for that, and you can start seeing the stress where there are portions of that Parkway where the base layer is already starting to fail. It's going to have to be reconstructed. That's $6 million price tag over the next 3 years. If we don't tend to that, could turn into a $10 or $12 million price tag and keep going up from there. So if the council's faced with the unpopular decision of having to reenact after that temporary on-ramp fee has expired, if they've not been successful with Prop 1 and they're facing other cuts in services or economic development, and if other economic development hasn't brought in new revenue and they're facing that liability of deferred maintenance, it's pretty rare that a council is going to be irresponsible enough to say, you know what, let's just let that infrastructure slide. We don't care if it goes from $6 to $10 or $12 million. Before they pass on that liability to the future of Snoqualmie residents and taxpayers, they will take a measure such as what I'm saying on the $40 car tab fee and probably reinstitute that. So you make a perfectly valid point, an accurate point. Right, we've had that conversation extensively with the council. The majority of the council just felt that that was more confusing than anything with the public right now, and given that it was more likely that fee would probably come back in the foreseeable future than go away.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Adam, go ahead. You wanted to, I don't see anyone else raising their hand, so we'll come back to you.
Okay, great, thanks. The Parkway, as I understand it, is, as you mentioned, a large chunk of this liability. And in November of 2020, Councilmember Mayhew had posted a really good letter, kind of a letter to the public on, I don't know if it was what media, but some local media saying, explaining that, 90% of the damage or whatever is, from heavy trucks, and we need support from the state to cover the Parkway because it's, it's not really citizens damage, it's heavy trucks and so on. So he had, in the letter, he had requested, everybody reach out to the state and ask for some help or support from the state. Has the state offered any sort of help to cover the expenses for the Parkway, being that that's the major liability? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You just offered me a perfect segue to the next comment I wanted to say, because the Parkway, I think, is a great part of this conversation. And it's also a part of why, to your point about costs and expenses and what resources do we need, that sometimes it becomes it's not a very clear crystal ball. So the Parkway is a big chunk. Okay, like I said, there's $30 million worth of liabilities, and the Parkway, of course, is a pretty big percentage of that. But if we can pull a rabbit out of our hat and get half of that or even most of that covered, that would be a significant relief for us to be able to then take whatever resources and really push it out to a lot of neighborhood streets and other infrastructure in the city, and be much more proactive and proactively aggressive about keeping us in that, what I call a proactive forward lean. So we stay on top of our infrastructure, keep it properly maintained, and really deliver high value to our residents, because we're not like many communities. It's not a secret for those in the know, but if you look at North Bend's infrastructure, they've allowed to get much of that infrastructure to get into a state of deferred maintenance where they're just doing emergency repairs all the time. And when you get in that mode, the public doesn't feel like they're getting value for their money. They don't tend to support the revenues, and it's a vicious cycle. It kind of snowballs on you. And then you got poor infrastructure and high costs. Right now, North Bend's got the highest utility rates of all the surrounding communities, and probably some of the poorest level of infrastructure, because they've gotten into that vicious cycle. We just don't even want to go down that road. With that said, to your point, the Parkway's kind of slipped that direction, and it's precisely because it's making me kind of get sweaty and nervous about every year that goes by that Parkway isn't getting taken care of. But it's a big frustration of the councils to say, why should we let the Snoqualmie residents have to pick up 100% of the dime on that road when our analysis has clearly showed, and the council wisely invested in doing that analysis and that traffic analysis to determine where the impacts are coming from, and it showed us what we suspected was that more of that regional economic traffic and trucks and all that was the deal. Senator Mullet has been profoundly helpful. We're getting sort of a mixed reaction from other representatives or from the legislature in general about, hey, this is not a common thing that the state will pay for local roads, and this is a precedent issue that if we give you money, it's going to cause problems elsewhere. So we've had not altogether successful results, but we've been, making a run at that for about the last 3 years, not successfully. Well, the problem is we're getting up to where something's got to be done. So we just had a lunch meeting with Senator Mullet yesterday, and we were encouraged that we're going to kind of do a two-pronged approach where he thinks there might be some money in the capital budget that he can set aside to at least maybe get up towards the 50% of that cost. The other strategy that we're approaching, we think has more promise, but the question is, how will the community react, is to approach the state to see if we can quickly convert the Parkway into what it essentially behaves as, and that is an extension of SR 18. There's no reason why SR 18 as a state highway should continue underneath the I-90. It stops at the I-90 right now, but basically turn it into State Route 18 all the way down to the 202 to connect those two state highways together. If it is a state highway, then the state will step up and pay the full amount on taking care of that Parkway. And so those, to Drew's point, it's not only trying to predict the council's behavior, but it's trying to predict the, what the state will do or what the legislature will do or what assistance we have. But meanwhile, I can't I can't play Russian roulette that if those monies don't come through and that Parkway again starts turning from a $6 million problem into a 10 and then a 12 and $18 million problem, that's pretty foolish. So we're kind of playing chicken right now with that Parkway, and it's just, we're running out of time, and it's a lot of urgency around that. So hopefully I kind of explain some of the dynamics around there. But so as much as the public might, as some people did on Facebook recently, say, what is with that crappy tar all over the Parkway? That's a Band-Aid we put on that. It's a crack seal basically to keep the water from getting into the surface layer. And with the winter coming, with the freeze thaws, it causes that surface layer to start breaking up or gets into the base layer and starts damaging the base layer at exponentially greater cost. So that's a Band-Aid to put over the Parkway to protect it, to try and buy 1 or 2 more years so we can successfully do that conversion to an SR18 extension, or hopefully get additional monies working with folks like Senator Mullet. So hopefully that addresses your question on that. I didn't mean to be too complicated on it.
Yes, that was good. Thanks. It's promising to hear that it sounds like you guys think you can get that covered, because then maybe we wouldn't have to have an increase. So yeah, that's great news. Thank you.
Right. So it would take considerable pressure off. Back to the point I was making with Richard, if we were successful in some of that conversion, the idea that the council would go back and reenact that $20, what is a temporary fee, and put it back in place as a permanent fee, so that it's a $40 permanent rather than 20. The pressure for the council to feel like they need to do that would be mitigated tremendously if we were successful in this conversion to SR18 with the state. So I want you to know that as much as it seems like the council's maybe dithering on this piece of infrastructure, they're trying to be as fiscally wise and prudent and fair with who should pay for that and how to get that done. It's just time is not on our side right now. All right, Joe, I'm going to turn to you. You haven't had a chance, and then Richard, I'll come back to you. So we'll do a little round robin. I want to make sure everybody else has a chance to speak. So Joe, and go ahead.
Thanks. So I'm Joe Johnson. I also live on Jacobia Street, interesting enough. So what I'm hearing is sort of a choice that citizens have to make, that we either pay to have decent infrastructure or we don't. So I'm wondering if I could just, I feel like we've kind of circled around this a little bit, but just want to make sure that I've got this from the mayor and staff. If we did only pay a $20 licensing fee, and that was it, projecting forward 30 years, what does our infrastructure look like?
Well, that's not as clean as question as you think, because the infrastructure could be fine if the council, something's going to have to give. The council's going to have to cut from other services. So, for example, you could got your parks or other programs or other capital investments, say in replacing playground equipment, and shove that money over to streets. And so it really depends on the choices the council makes, but something's going to have to give. So it could be you see a degradation in the quality of levels of service of the replacing of old rusted playground equipment, or it could be streets that not only are looking a little rougher, but then are far more costly to repair in the future than if they were properly maintained. Or even some suffering and some programmatic issues and so forth, or investments in other.
So assuming that we kept the levels of service the same for other things and just focusing on the infrastructure alone, if that was all the money that we had for the infrastructure, we kept everything else, parks, safety, et cetera, the same.
Yeah, right.
And then projecting forward, what happens?
I think it would be safe to say that you'd start seeing a lot of the street infrastructure go the way of North Bend. And if you've driven through, I campaigned for the state, as some folks know, back in I think 2015 or 16, and had became more intimately familiar going door to door, knocking through streets through North Bend, and I was taken aback at just how bad the streets were. In many of the neighborhood streets, there was more potholes than there was actual asphalt or street. So that's a real risk I think we have, is that you would see we wouldn't be able to as aggressively rebuild infrastructure downtown to then get us into a place where we can properly maintain it at a better value, but we would start to see real stress on streets and roads throughout Snoqualmie Ridge. And again, I kind of laugh because I worked in a large complex down in Renton before my wife and I moved out here, and we were struggling at that time with a campus that had been built in the 1950s, and of course all of it was aging at the same time, and we were facing everything having to be fixed at the same time some 30 years later. And we first drove out of Snoqualmie Ridge. I said, man, I feel sorry for the people who are going to be in charge of that place 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because it's all going to age at the same time. Well, I didn't know that I was going to be the the one wrestling with that. But that's always been in the back of my mind, knowing that as wonderful it is, what having Snoqualmie Ridge being sort of this brand new community, the thing that was going to be always be a challenge for us is that all that infrastructure is aging at the same time, and it was going to hit us, kind of all at once. Drew, it looks like you want to add a point.
Well, I think just to add a point to this is the good thing about the 0.2% sales and use tax is it does keep up with inflation over time. So in essence, you would not lose your purchasing power basically to purchase the goods and services that you need in order to maintain your streets over time. Whereas the vehicle license fee is kind of dependent on population growth in order to actually achieve that degree of inflation necessary to keep up with the inflating cost of construction materials and so on. So one of the benefits to this 0.2% sales and use tax is it would actually protect our purchasing power, where you wouldn't necessarily get that with the vehicle licensing fee. And as a result, there would probably be less degradation of our transportation improvements or facilities over time as a result.
Yeah, our population right now is plateauing. We've reached the full build out of Snoqualmie Ridge. Another point I think it's excellent to make that was attractive about this taxing mechanism for the council versus the car tab fee is the car tab fee is probably one of the most regressive taxes that you can have. Someone who's got a $1,000 jalopy pays as much taxes for local benefit of streets as someone with an $80,000 Tesla, whereas the sales tax is far more progressive in that regard too. So, Joe, did that answer your question, or did you have anything else on that?
I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, go ahead. We only have about 5 minutes left, and I'm happy to hang around a little longer. Some folks want to, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Richard, go ahead. If we could turn Richard's microphone on.
Will the recording of this be made available? I think there's a lot of good material, and as you mentioned, there aren't a lot of people apparently online watching it, and I'm just hoping that more of the city will see it by recording.
Yeah, that's a great point, Richard. Thank you. I believe we intend to post this. In fact, right on the city's homepage, you should be able to find links to this information and to Drew's presentation with the links that he's embedded in it. And Joan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our intention is to grab the link of this recorded meeting tonight and post that in the same location so folks can find that.
Yes, true. Yes, true.
But thank you. Great point, Richard.
It's also available on YouTube as well.
Yeah. And we'll provide that YouTube link along with this recording on the city's homepage. Richard, your microphone's still on. Did you have anything else to add, or does that satisfy you? Or? Mr. Shield?
No, ahead. I don't have any other questions, no.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Right, well, again, yeah, for some reason, last time we did a big town hall meeting on what we thought was a great attractive heading of parks, pipes, and pavement, we got a rather thin turnout. It's important stuff. As I hope many of you could conclude hearing about some of the infrastructure issues tonight. I really appreciate that you've all taken the time to turn out and dial in and become more informed about some of the challenges facing the city council and the city in general. And just again, thank you for coming, and have a good evening. Or Drew, any closing words or anything else to say? Or
no, we've got the posted or information posted on this slide. Links to lots of different materials in the slide deck as well. Also have present here the King County election website as well, so you can read the ballot description, the explanatory statement, as well as read the statements in favor and opposition. And I guess the last thing is we would appreciate everyone going out there and voting. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Yeah, thank you all. All right, have a good night.
Hello, hello, hello. Oh, okay, good night, good night, good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jimmy.
Always here to help.
Thank you.